Okay, I'm going to talk about the Dodwell manuscript, and I think it's very important. I searched YouTube and there was nothing about it there, and so I wanted to put something up, and so hopefully this will be a fairly short video about the Dodwell manuscript, and I think it's a very important piece of evidence as a detective. This manuscript, it was a manuscript, was never published, but is now available on the World Wide Web. If you Google it, you'll find it, the Dodwell manuscript. The document was put together by late Australian astronomer George Dodwell. While Dodwell was working as a government astronomer, he had in his possession ancient documents that contained some puzzling astronomical observations recorded by ancient astronomers. The measurements were taken during winter and summer solstice, measuring the length of a shadow measurement at the longest and shortest day of the year. Included in the records were observations and measurements obtained from Chinese, Hindu, Greek, Arabian, Persian, medieval European astronomers, going back as far as 3,000 years ago. The figures were familiar to astronomers, but apparently there was something terribly wrong with the measurements. They kept changing over time, and they assumed that there must be bad measurements, but this was very important to them, and it's not likely. They weren't what modern astronomers expected them to be, the measurements. It was found that they were uniformly incorrect. All measurements were consistent with each other, each one from around the globe at the same days and the same years, but they're not consistent with what modern experts predicted they should be. Modern academia concluded the measurements all had made the same mistakes in their measurements. This explanation did not satisfy George Dodwell. He was a good detective, and that's what detectives do. You don't just dismiss evidence, you check it out. And he wondered how several different observers could have made the same errors. Rather than disregard the measurements as others had, he instead intrigued and sought to find a way to explain them. And that's what a detective does. He was a good detective. Dodwell knew the ancient observers who made these measurements were meticulous in their observations as it was part of their religions. They used these measurements for their building projects. Errors of this type would be unthinkable and highly unlikely. Dodwell believed there had to be another explanation for the apparent error. All the records measured the latitude position correctly, but their apparent error came in the measuring the Earth in its alignment with the Sun. Dodwell believed the correctness of the latitude gave credence to their measurements. Dodwell pondered over these measurements and eventually decided to graph the measurements. What he found was a distinct pattern of discrepancies as he went back in history. Dodwell saw the curve and recognized it as the same type of curve that a spinning top has when acted upon by an outside force before regaining a new axis. When upset by an outside force, the top will change its axis and begin to totter back and forth. Eventually, the top will stabilize in a new axis. Dodwell concluded from his graph that there must have been a dramatic event in the Earth's past which caused the actual alignment of the Earth to change. His estimation of what that might have been that caused it caused people to reject it, but he still has the evidence there. And so I wouldn't reject everything just because he might have not had a good idea of how it happened. Here's how the Earth was. He thought it was started off up and down, and it turned over to the right, back and forth until it settled at 23 degrees. Dodwell's curves made from an ancient measurement show the Earth's axis shifted back and forth from 26 degrees to 20 degrees, finally settling at 23.44 degrees. That's what we have today. He concluded there were 7 semi-oscillations between 2345 BC and 1850 AD. The semi-oscillation period he found to be 599 years. That's when it would switch back and forth. The points where the axis is farthest from the 23 degrees are at 2345 BC, 1746 BC, 1147 BC, 548 BC, 52 AD, 651 AD, 1250 AD, and 1849 to 1850. In examining the curve, Dodwell made some important discoveries. First, the curve pointed to a starting point of 2345 BC as the Earth began to totter. He concluded something dramatic must have occurred during that year to cause the Earth to get off its axis. He saw that the tottering ended in 1850. And here's his graph where he showed how it went and is slowly getting less and less and less. And one thing I did a lot of research on my own, but I'm not going to go into it all. But right around the time of Joshua's longest day was right when it was switching back and forth. And anyway, there's his graph. It's in his manuscript. If you go look at that. Dodwell did not understand what all this meant, and his calculations lay untouched on his desk for 2 years before he took a second look at them. He went back to his graph to look at the 3 historical enigmas, the date calculations these events revealed have puzzled astronomers. Dodwell's research began to consider these 3 well-documented data enigmas relating to Exodus, Stonehenge, and the Egyptian solar temple at Amun-Ra. Exodus was a Greek mathematician, geographer, and astronomer who lived from 400 to 347 BC. Among the astronomical observations made by Astronus is a careful calculation determining the north celestial pole, the point in the sky which the stars apparently appear to rotate, and thus the position marking the extrapolation alignment of Earth's axis. The problem is that the basis of reverse projection from modern measurements of the Earth's axis and orbit, the observations of Exodus do not fit the same time of 350 BC. If Exodus did make his observation in 350 BC as he claimed, there is something seriously wrong with our present day procedure of projecting directly back from current astronomical alignments to determine what the alignment should be at a particular time in the past. So they just go back with uniformitarianism, and they don't think there might have been a catastrophic event in the past. Modern astronomers viewed Exodus' conclusions and assumed he had made a mistake and his conclusions were wrong, or these measurements would have been much earlier, had to be in that position. Dodwell compared his graph model with his observation, Exodus. He saw they were exactly what Dodwell's model predicted them to be in 350 BC. This was pretty exciting to him. While modern skeptics have written off Exodus, Dodwell saw his work as further validation of his own conclusions. The second enigma Dodwell examined was Stonehenge. The Stonehenge ancient site is found in southern England. It is a series of huge stones that are arranged in a circular shape. The ancients used Stonehenge for astronomical observation as part of their religious ceremonies. It is believed that during the summer solstice, rays of the sun would go through the heel stone into the center of the stone's altar stone. Based on evidence, archaeologists believe the Druids constructed the site around 350. Then again, it did not match up with modern astrological predicaments for the alignment of the Earth at the time. So they assumed that it must have been 4000 BC, although the evidence points to 350. Based on the alignment, they changed the date of the construction to much earlier, around 3000 BC. And Dodwell looked at the 350 BC and compared that with his calculations of where the axis should be at the time. Based on his curve, his calculations showed that the alignment during the solstice would be perfect for the 350 date that the ancient astronomers had originally concluded. The final piece of evidence Dodwell considered was the solar temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak in Egypt. The temple is believed to have been built around the time of Pharaoh, near 2000 BC. The date is validated in recorded history inscriptions, and the temple was designed so that during the summer solstice, a ray of light would focus on a specific point in the temple. This special day occurred on the longest day of the year, the summer solstice, and when the sun was farthest north. This building was designed so that only on that day could the sun would fill the hall with light during its setting. And the Pharaoh on that day would gather the people around the temple and position himself at the end of the hall, and he would be enlightened by the sun while it set. He used this occurrence to validate the belief that Pharaoh and the sun god Ra were one in the very impressive way. The sanctuary remained dark the rest of the year. Modern astronomers have looked at the position of the temple door and compared it to their calculations of where the axis should have been at the time. Their calculations did not fit. Their calculations showed that this could not have occurred any time before 4000 BC, while it actually recorded in 2000 BC. Experts believe that only then would the sun would be far enough north to fill the hall with light. Yet there were heroic writings validating that the sun shone into the sanctuary at the latter date. Dodwell again considered the tottering the earth model and showed that the sun would be in correct position to fill the hall with light on the date they recorded it happened. It was consistent with his calculations again. Dodwell validated his curve to be consistent with Exodus, Stonehenge, and Solar Temple of Amun-Ra with the original dates. These three former enigmas, now solved, validated his calculations and the curve he had produced. By the time the pattern was becoming clear, Dodwell, and he was beginning to see that the problem was with modern astronomical dating. A dramatic event had occurred which was not being accounted for in the calculations. The measurements of the ancients proved to be accurate. Dodwell went on his calculations and he formulated, was able to make the most remarkable conclusion. He knew something catastrophic happened to the earth in 2345 BC. He believed that God's judgment on sinful man resulted in major tottering and tilting of the Earth's axis. He concluded there was at the time a major impact in the area of the Pacific Ocean that knocked the Earth off its axis. And that's kind of the reason they reject it, because they don't think that could have happened. Dodwell wrote the following letter in an early 1960s to Dr. Arthur Brandenburg of Laval University in Quebec, Canada, showing that he thought of his discovery. I've been making, during the last 26 years, an extensive investigation of what we know in astronomy as the secular variation of the obliquity of the ecliptic. From a study of the available ancient observations of the position of the sun of solstice during the past 3,000 years, I find a curve which, after allowing for all the changes, showed a typical exponential curve of recovery of the Earth's axis after a sudden change from a former nearly vertical position to an inclination of 26.5 degrees, from which it was returned to an equilibrium at the present inclination of 23.5 degrees during the interval of the succeeding 3,194 years to AD to 1850 AD. The date of the change of the Earth's axis, 2345, is none other than that of the flood recorded in the Bible, and the resulting conclusion is that the Bible account of the flood as a universal one, together with the story of Noah's Ark, is historically true. The Dodwell graph showed the tottering to have stopped in the year 1850. Dodwell, a devout Christian, concluded that it was this sudden shift of the Earth's axis that led to the flood of Noah. Rene Neuberg, 1928 to 1995, mentioned in his Secrets of the Lost Races that Dodwell wrote to Professor Arthur J. Brandon of Ohio State, outlining his theories in the following manner. I have been making during the last 26 years an extensive investigation of what we know in astronomy as a secular variation of obliquity of the ecliptic. From a study in the variable ancient observations of a position of the sun of the solstice during the last 3,000 years, I find a curve which, after allowing for all known changes, shows a typical exponential curve of recovery of the Earth's axis after a sudden change from a former nearly vertical degrees to an inclination of 26.5 degrees, from which it returned to an equilibrium at the present 23.5 degrees during the interval of the 3,194 years and stopped in 1850. So he gave basically the same information. I don't know what either one of them did with this stuff. A few bits of other information. In 2011, Michael Bailey, the renowned dendrochronologist, had a PowerPoint presentation at Quanta Evaluation Conference in Athens, which he offered a tree ring evidence that clearly demonstrated an event in 2345 BC. The UK Daily Telegraph reported in 2001, scientists have found the first evidence that a devastating meteor impact in the Middle East might have triggered the mysterious collapse of civilizations more than 4,000 years ago. Dr. Penny Picer said that the craters recently found in Argentina date around the same period, suggesting the Earth may have been hit by a shower of large meteors at the time. So this is my book. This is where all my research is, and this is one piece of evidence, the Dodwell Manuscript. I also have a YouTube video if you look for the Star of Noah, and there's a lot of evidence. I think there was a huge planet that was going through the solar system. It hit something around Jupiter, and it started breaking up. I think it was an ice planet, and it left the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars there, and there's still ice on those asteroids, so they know it happened less than 10,000 years ago. I think it all happened at the same time. All the water that they saw on Mars, I think it happened from impacts from this watery planet. And then it came by the Earth, and it was dropping off these little asteroids, hitting the Earth everywhere and causing other problems with electrical connections between the planets and the moon. And anyway, that's why we have all these craters that they talked about, and I think most of them happened during this time. And my theory on the Earth is that it wouldn't have hit the Earth because they both had magnetic fields and they're both negatively charged, and they would have kind of expelled each other when they're going by each other. But if the edge of the planet came by and it was the positive part, and then it would have pulled the Earth over. And being a huge planet, it would have been able to do this, and I believe that's exactly what happened. And you can check out my YouTube video, and all these things on the moon that are all torn up. I think this almost all happened during this event. Another little piece of evidence, I like to, when project is validated by the Bible, and this one was already validated by the Bible in 2345, and I found one thing that I don't think anybody has ever seen, and we'll talk about that in a second. The date of the Earth, the change of the Earth's axis was 2345, is none other than that of the flood recorded in the Bible, and resulting conclusion is the biblical account of the flood as a universal one, together with the story of Noah's Ark, is historically true. It might also indicate an encounter with an extraterrestrial body that affected the Earth's axis and caused a widespread destruction, including some theories, the destruction of Atlantis. And I believe that is true. The idea, there's a lot of other cultures that talk about Earth coming, and the Jewish culture and the Sumerian cultures talk about it, and you can see it in my book. But anyway, here's the verse that I found, and I don't think anybody found it. It's only in the NASB, and that's a literal translation where they translated the Bible the way it is, and all the other translations said, oh, that can't be right, and they change it. So here's what it says. It's talking about the flood in Psalm 104. He established the earth upon its foundations so that it will not totter forever and ever. And so it's saying that the earth is tottering, but it won't totter forever and ever, and it didn't totter forever and ever. This was fulfilled in 1850. So that's my, check out my other YouTube and check out my book. I don't think it's available on Amazon, but it is on Barnes & Noble and other places.